The hills of Appalachia are full of all manner of tales of ghosts and monsters. But from 1817 to 1821, a family living along the Red River in Tennessee was haunted by a malevolent entity. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to talk about America's greatest ghost story, the Bell Witch. The story of the Bell Witch revolves around John Bell and his family after they moved to the Red River area of Robertson County, Tennessee in the early 1800s. Everything was going good. John Bell was building up his farm. He was becoming a member of the community. And then one day he sees this weird creature out in one of his cornfields. And John Bell sees this creature and it has the body of a dog, but the head of a rabbit. And he's like, okay, that's weird. So like any other American, he pulled out his gun because if you have a problem, you solve it with gun. And if gun doesn't fix it, you get a bigger gun. Duh. He shoots at this creature a couple times, it runs away, and he's like, cool, problem solved. Except it wasn't, because things would just get weirder from this point on. Looking back, this creature was really just a harbinger of things to come, because then came the knocking. And this knocking sound started out super faint, but over time it would get louder and louder and louder and more frequent until the entire family was having trouble sleeping at night. It got to the point where John Bell and the men in his family were sleeping in shifts. That way when the knocking began, whoever was awake in the family could run outside to try and find the source of the knocking, but they never could. Whatever this thing was, it did not like being seen in the light. The children reported that as soon as they blew their candles out at nighttime, remember this is the 1800s, they would start hearing what sounded like gnawing of rats on their bedpost, but when they'd relight their candles, they wouldn't see anything and the noises would stop. Whatever this thing was, it had a certain level of intelligence, and it was getting more and more active and more aggressive over time, until it eventually started talking to the family. If the knocking wasn't horrifying enough, eventually it turned into a voice that sounded like the very faint voice of an old woman singing hymns. And over time, this voice would get louder and louder and more intelligent, with its speaking becoming more and more articulated until it was having entire conversations with members of the Bell's family. It started quoting scripture and on 2 occasions quoted sermons that were going on in real time, word for word. And these churches were over a dozen miles away from the farm, but this entity was still quoting these sermons. Then eventually the hauntings would become violent, with whatever this entity was setting its sights on the Bell family slaves and Betsy Bell. Whatever this entity was, it seemed to enjoy pulling people's hair, knocking people to the ground, and slapping them to the point where several people at the Bell farm reported having welts and hand-shaped slap marks on their face and bodies. Eventually, John Bell would tell some of his neighbors about what was going on at the farm, and one of these families was the Johnston family. Now, we don't know if it was out of general curiosity or if they were concerned for the physical and mental well-being of the many Bell family children, but they agreed to come over and stay the night at the Bell family residence. And it was a fairly pleasant visit. The Johnstons and the Bells, they talked into the late hours of the night, and eventually they retired to a bedroom to sleep for the night. Up until that point, there had really not been anything paranormal happening. But as soon as they tried going to sleep, something kept pulling the blankets off the Johnston family. Now, even though getting the blankets pulled off them was kind of annoying, James Johnston did fall asleep, but eventually something would grab him and slap him awake. He shot up and he declared for this thing to show itself in the name of the Lord, and after that, nothing happened for the rest of the night. The next morning, Johnston told the family what he thought this entity was, saying, and I quote, "It's an evil spirit, the kind that the Bible talks about." And this is kind of an interesting point to make because traditionally, ghosts do not get more intelligent over time. Like, they have one MO, they have one means of operation. That doesn't change drastically over time. If a ghost, if its haunt is to just be a shadowy figure that goes from one end of a hallway to another, it might be more clearly seen some nights. It might be more active at certain points of the year, or like on particularly, cold, dark, moonlit nights. But it doesn't change its haunt over time. Same thing with poltergeists. Poltergeists are a more dangerous form of ghost. They clomp around and knock stuff around, make all sorts of noise, throw stuff. But that's just what they do. They throw stuff and they make noise. Whatever this entity was, it was getting more elaborate and more intelligent over time, which has led people to believe that this might have been some type of demonic entity, or maybe even a djinn. How did a djinn end up in rural Tennessee? Don't worry about it. But yeah, a lot of people claim that this was not just a ghost. This was something very, very different. Now, after the Johnston family sleepover, stories of this entity started spreading throughout the area, and coincidentally, General Andrew Jackson just was in the area at the time and apparently decided to come to the Bell family farm to do some ghost hunting. Also, it's believed that John Bell had fought under General Jackson during the War of 1812, so there was that connection there as well. And according to the story, Jackson packed up an entire wagon of supplies and special men who were trained in the supernatural and defending against supernatural, and started the trip to the Bell family household. And along the way, their wagon, it just stopped. It just got stuck. The wheels just stopped moving. The horses were pulling on it. The men were pushing on it. But this wagon would not move, at which point Jackson proclaimed that it must be the work of the Bell Witch. And upon proclaiming this, a disembodied female voice told them that she would allow them to continue on, but she would visit them again that evening. So the men got to the farm, started settling in, they pitched their tents. General Jackson talked to the Bell family, he regaled them with stories about his time during the War of 1812. Everyone was having a pretty good night. And one of the men that Jackson brought along was a self-proclaimed witch tamer or witch layer. Most people agree that that was a mistranslation. He meant to say he was a witch slayer. But yeah, I love the idea that even this far back, like today we have this idea that there's all sorts of these like shadowy government agencies that are in charge of like taking care of things that go bump in the night, whether it's the Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense from like the Hellboy universe, or the SCP Foundation, or I guess even like the Men in Black. Like, that is a common trope today, but it's weird to think that that was a trope all the way back when the country was still like super young, that Jackson had this group of like paranormal experts in his military that he just kept around him. Pretty cool. So this witch slayer, he had a pistol that he claimed was loaded with a silver bullet, that if he shot a witch, the witch would instantly die. As the night went on and on and on, they started to get more restless and tired. They were hoping to see something supernatural. This guy proclaimed that, well, the witch is afraid of showing itself because of my silver bullet gun. To which he immediately started being slapped by an invisible force and proclaiming that he felt like he was being stuck by thousands of pins at the same time. Whatever this entity was grabbed him and just beat him all the way to the door, threw him outside, and then came back and told the rest of the men, hey, there's another fraud among you, and I'm gonna do the same thing to them tomorrow night. It's unknown what happened next, but the next morning, Jackson and his men were seen on the road heading towards Nashville, so whatever happened, they decided to get out of town. With Jackson allegedly saying, "I would rather fight the British at New Orleans than to fight the Bell Witch." Now, as time went on, the hauntings would get more and more intense, and John Bell's health would deteriorate more and more and more. He started having muscle spasms, primarily in his face, but in other parts of his body, and he was constantly falling down. Anytime he fell, it was reported that the Bell Witch would, jump on him, and this invisible entity would just slap him while he was trying to recover. The entire time while this was going on, the entity would just hurl insults and make fun of John Bell. And on December 20th, John Bell was in a coma-like state. The entity was just hurling insults at him, making fun of him, and the family started searching around the home for what could have caused this. They find this tiny glass vial with a dark liquid in it, and the Bell Witch proclaimed, "Oh yeah, I gave some of that to him last night, that's why he is the way he is," to which they found a cat, and they put a couple of drops of whatever was in this vial on the cat's tongue, and it said that the cat leapt up off the ground, flipped over, and was dead before it landed back on the ground. Then they took the vial, threw it into the fireplace. It exploded in a ball of blue flame that shot up the chimney, and shortly after that, John Bell passed away. But the Bell Witch wasn't done with John Bell, because it even showed up at his funeral, which was a huge funeral. Hundreds of people came from miles around. 3 different ministers wanted to eulogize John Bell. It was a big ordeal, and the entire time, the ghost, or whatever this entity was, just hung out in the woods and hurled insults and sung songs of celebration about John Bell's death. I hope to one day hit that level of pettiness. Now, shortly after John Bell's death, the reports of the hauntings and paranormal activities slowed down over time. And there are several explanations about what could have been the cause of the Bell Witch. The first one we're going to talk about is a woman named Kate Batts. So oftentimes the female voice, the entity known as the Bell Witch, is referred to by the Bell family as Kate. And Kate was this woman, she married into the Batts family, and at some point members of the Batts family and the Bell family had a big dispute over a slave, because this was Tennessee in the 1800s. And while John was trying to buy up a lot of land in the area, it's believed that he started butting heads more and more with the Batts family. Kate Batts, her husband, was paralyzed, so she was the main handler of not just the farm, but her family's business, and it's believed that the Bells might have wanted to buy some property or other things from the Batts, and this constant butting of heads might have caused them to make up some of these stories in order to try and discredit Kate Batts, which is very well precedented. Look up the Salem witch trial land disputes. A lot of the individuals that were involved in the Salem witch trial were either trying to purchase land or had people trying to purchase land off of them, and it was easier just to accuse them of witchcraft and kind of have the state get rid of them than actually litigate and try and get the land from them. It's a whole big historical thing. And that's why a lot of people believe that these stories were made up against the Betts family. The other person that people often blame for the Bell Witch is one Professor Richard R.P. Powell. So Powell was a teacher. He had kind of bounced between school to school in the Nashville area, almost like he was trying to get away from something, until finally settling in the Red River area and working at a school near the Bell family. He almost immediately began being fascinated with Elizabeth Bell, who was super young at the time. He was like 11 years older than her. Yeah, creepy. I'm so glad that like creeps like this no longer work in the education system. I'm so glad that we took care of that problem. But many people regard Powell as a mathematical genius, a student of the occult, a ventriloquist, which, yeah, that makes sense. And they accuse him of, terrorizing the Bell family with either his occult powers or his ability to ventriloquize, I don't know what it's called, basically make these noises. And it was so he could try and lure Betsy away from the family, which is super creepy. But eventually it did work, because at some point they did get married and move away from the area. So, yeah, that's one of the explanations for the Bell Witch. And to this day, there's still reports of supernatural activity at the site of the Bell farm. From disembodied shadows to weird human-shaped mists, orbs, disembodied, candlelight that kind of moves around the farm, and of course, whispering and knocking sounds persist, allegedly, to this day. So what are your thoughts on the Bell Witch? It's definitely a fascinating story. It has a lot of elements that, there's a harbinger, the ghost gets more and more powerful over time. There's actual, historical figures who are intertwined with the story. There is the mystery and the controversy of, this teacher and this woman that there might have been, land and property disputes with. It kind of has something for everyone. And yeah, that's probably why it has had so much staying power. Nearly 200 years later, people are talking about the Bell Witch. But it has staying power, and people are still talking about the Bell Witch even to this day. But yeah, let me know what are your thoughts on the Bell Witch. As always, thank you for sticking around this long. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Let me know what other ghost stories you would like to see me talk about in the future. But until next time, don't forget to stay wild, stay wonderful, stay away from the Bell Witch, and I'll talk to you later.